Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai. Welcome to this webinar hosted by the Review into the Future for Local Government. We're here to discuss the panel's draft report, He Mata Whariki, He Mata Whanui. Before we begin, I'd ask that Antoine lead us in with a karakia.
Kia ora mai tātou, tūtahi māku I me ana kia koutou katoa I te whānau, e noho mai nā I tai takarau, tāmaki, Waikato, ngā tara Māori, Coromandel, Pōtiki mai tāwhiti, Tūranganui a Kiwa Gisborne, o tira ki Hawke's Bay, I te whānau, I te taho te awa o Tūtaikuri. Just like to acknowledge everyone who's in those respective areas that might be affected by the storm and floodwaters or heavy winds, and whatever situation you're in, we're just thinking about you and hoping that people are safe and well. O tira ka tīmata I tātou hui I tēnei wā, and I'll start our hui with a blessing. Tūtaua mai I runga, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Acknowledging those things above us and below us, within us and outside of us, we're hoping that our life essence, the Māori of us, spreads to those around us. Haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Antoine. So, ko Janine Dowding tuku ingoa. I'm the executive. Just ask Antoine if you would, thank you. I'm the executive director.
Sorry, the storm just started up again.
Yeah, we heard that. I am the executive director supporting the panel's work with the team from the Secretariat. And the way we're going to work today is that we're going to take you through a brief presentation or summary of the report, and then we're going to open up to you to ask any questions that you might have. This webinar is focused on rangatahi, and it is a great, what better voice than youth to be having a say on the future for local government. So we are very delighted to have you come to this webinar and share this time with us. If you have any questions as we go, please feel free to put those questions under the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and don't wait until we call for questions, because we will be gathering those questions as we go and preparing to answer them when we come to that section. If you're having any technical problems, please use the chat function to let us know, and we'll see what the team can do to help you. So with that, we'll get our webinar underway. So the Review into the Future for Local Government was established by the then Minister of Local Government, Minister Nanaia Mahuta, and it followed calls from the sector to explore the purpose and role of local government in New Zealand. It is an independent review to identify how local democracy and governance needs to change to build and support thriving communities and to actively embody the treaty partnership. The draft report from the panel was released at 28th of October last year. And we'll move on to the next slide and touch a little bit more on the panel and the timeframes. So here we have the panel, and it's my pleasure to introduce the panel members that we have here with us today, which is Chair Jim Palmer, Penny Hulse, Gail Surgener, and Antoine Coffin. And Brendan Boyle offers his apologies. He may be able to join us, but we'll see how that one goes. This panel has an absolute belief in the future of local government, the importance of local government to communities, and they are very invested in this review. And it comes through both in how they have strongly engaged with so many groups to try to get that input and to have rich thinking for their report, and how they discuss their diverse views, how they discuss and debate issues as a panel. Next slide, please. So this is our timeline, and so the draft report released last year, and the final report to be released on June the 19th of this year. The report, the key date I think really want to impress on you, which is not here, but actually is here, the 28th of February, and that is the date that submissions close. So by the end of this month, we're hoping for a huge amount of submissions, and with the audience we have on today, we can't impress on you enough how much we are really hoping to see some of those submissions come through from that, those representing youth or those youth that would like to have a say in the report. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of the engagement the panel has done, and I think it doesn't really do justice to how much they have engaged. They have literally met with thousands of people collectively to inform their thinking, and this is just such an important thing for them to really go out and engage and understand views for their work. Next slide, please. So before I hand it over to Antoine, just a little plug around those submissions again. We will come back and touch on that at the end of the webinar. Want to remind you that you do not need to answer everything on the platform or the tool that allows you to load your submissions. You can just choose those topics that you want to express a view, and we really urge you to do that. So over to you, Antoine.
Hey, kia ora whānau. Firstly, apologies. The rain just started up about 3 minutes ago. And it's pretty hard outside, so if it gets a little bit too loud and it's a bit hard for people to hear, I might pass over to Penny, but we'll see how we go. Hey, this review is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reimagine local government, and so our draft report, which was released in October, traverses a broad and complex range of issues. It's 258 pages, it's really comprehensive and deep on a range of issues, including issues confronting our future generations. So please have a look at that, but also obviously we're going to give a bit of a snapshot of the report in our presentation. As you know, local government has a critical role in responding to increasingly complex issues facing New Zealand, like climate change, significant weather changes, etc. And we think in the future local government will be ready and able to play that vital role, engaging with youth and having them involved in the journey. There's the next slide. How's that sounding, Janine?
Good.
Okay, cool. Revitalising citizen-led democracy. We think that local government facilitates democracy and it doesn't deliver it. Democracy is there for all of its citizens. It's the way in which citizens participate and help in the decision-making process. And so we are certainly signalling that challenges of the 21st century will need new ways of doing things. Certainly we've heard that there is a reducing or a lack of trust in democratic institutions. And so we're looking at different ways that can be improved and strengthened. So we're looking towards more inclusive and innovative democratic practices. In many countries, participative and deliberative democracy processes are regularly used, and there's some good examples in Australia and other places that we've had a look at. And we think that New Zealand, in terms of the maturity of its democratic systems, is ready for these types of changes, which will involve much more representative and diverse voices being part of, put into decision-making processes, and in some cases, making those decisions on behalf of the community. We certainly see that in the future there's going to be a role for our current form of representative elective democracy, where we elect our members every few years, and we think that that system can be replenished and built on. And so we've recommended a number of quite specific actions that can be implemented to improve the current system. And some of those include, being able to attract capable leaders from diverse backgrounds. Remuneration is one of the significant barriers to a lot of people. They've said you can only own a business or be in a position where you're able to take time off from work to be able to be a representative, and so it often is a barrier to people who are starting out in their career, particularly youth, but people from diverse communities who might be trying to juggle a number of different things. And so local government is certainly a significant investment of their time that they're not able to make. So we've proposed a number of changes in the system, like representation reviews, voting mechanisms, reducing the voting age for 16 and 17-year-olds, and that seems to have got a lot of media attention and feedback, and we'd really like your feedback on that. Increasing the terms to 4 years, we think that might help with having a bit more of a long-term focus, because a lot of the decisions being made now definitely need to have an intergenerational consideration. And we're also posing some other proposals around capability-based appointments. So where there might be skills missing in the council, there's ability to be able to bring some people on to help, and mana whenua appointments, where tangata whenua, the people who have the close association with the land or the particular area, there's a process where they may be appointed to help with the decision making and a voice for tangata whenua.
And can I just interrupt for a wee minute, because I think there's something I didn't do justice to there, and I just wanted to take a step back, because you've just covered off how to build that democracy, representative democracy. And one of the things I didn't mention is that the panel used a tool called Get Vocal in Your Local, which many of you I hope will be aware of. It was a survey tool to go out and particularly targeted at youth and to draw out their views, and that had a the feedback through that tool had a bearing on the panel's thinking in things like lowering the voting age and thinking about local government decision making. So I just wanted to touch on that briefly, and also mention that the panel also engaged with the Make It 16 group, the UN youth group, high school students and young elected members. So they and I believe we have many representatives that might have been involved in those engagements actually have joined this webinar, so just an extra special welcome to you as well. Sorry, Antoine, I'll get you back to your flow.
No, that's okay. Well, you've probably broken my flow now. That's okay. No, I'm easily distracted. I just want to mention the Make It 16 group. We actually heard, I think it was at least once or twice we heard from them early on our review, and we were really taken by how they articulated the arguments for us considering youth voices at every opportunity in democracy. And from memory, they pointed us to Article 22 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And it's not something that you often go to, like, oh, this morning I think I'll just check out the declaration. So it was a really good prompt. And when I had a look at the declaration, it really, to me, and to the panel, said that at every opportunity we need to be thinking about how do we provide our citizens with the ability to access democratic conventions, like the ability to have your voice heard, being involved in decision making, those types of things. The system reflects your preferences, as well as every democracy should be providing for the right of its citizens to vote. And it doesn't have an age, and so that's something that we've taken on board, and it's always a bit of a call, and we've made a call. We've just said, hey, we think people who are 16 and 17, they're exposed to many of the things that certainly in my age group we were not exposed to, and we were at a similar age. And so that that global context, climate change and other 21st century challenges, which we've mentioned, those are really important. So to have everybody's voice and be considering how do you make our system of democracy more accessible. So that was my little distraction, Janine, from that little plug. In terms of Te Tiriti, Chapter 3 of our draft report is quite a fulsome report, and if people are really interested in Te Tiriti and Te Ao Māori values, that's a good chapter to go and have a read on. Just in summary, we think local government can be reframed in terms of its relationship with iwi and hapu and Māori organisations. We see that Te Ao Māori should be woven through the fabric of our New Zealand identity, and for local government as a system, there are a number of things that we could draw from Te Ao Māori would be of great value. The Te Ao Māori views in terms of well-being, relationships with Papa Tuanuku, Mother Earth and Sky Father, the way in which we interact with ourselves in terms of whanaungatanga, our connections with each other. There's lots of really positive things that we can draw on and Te Ao Māori values into our local government system, not only because they're a good thing to do, but also it makes it a safe place for Māori to interact and other cultures to interact with. We've made a number of specific recommendations in this area, including a new treaty framework for local government, embedding tikanga and what the council does in terms of its meetings and engagement processes, making government a safe place to work and a welcoming place for Māori to work in, and also a major investment in capability and capacity. That's both in local government in terms of the new Māori ward and constituency members that have joined council, but potentially in the future we're having much closer relationships with tangata whenua, iwi and hapu groups, making sure that everyone's got the right capability and capacity to be able to get success out of the system. I'm just going to pass over to Gail, and it's quite timely that the rain just stopped, and so I'm just going to pass it over.
Thanks, Anton. Kia ora koutou. I'm going to cover 4 themes in the draft report, which are all very interconnected. The role and function of local government, including its wellbeing role, the relationship between local government and central government, how local government's funded, and finally how local government's organised. So the role and function, we're very clear that the future role and function of local government needs to be, in addition to the infrastructure and service delivery role of local government, a much stronger focus on people and communities. And that's because a lot of the big complex issues of the 21st century, like climate change, biodiversity loss, social and economic challenges like child poverty or youth participation in the economy, are those wicked problems, the complex ones that a centralised approach from Wellington alone is not going to crack it. And there needs to be much more enablement of local issues to be solved locally, with local government having a key role. Next slide, please. We think that local government or councils can be much more wellbeing councils of the future, grappling with these challenges as well as delivering core services. And the critical role for local government that we think needs to be strengthened is that as a champion and activator of local wellbeing, including child and youth wellbeing. And this will require councils to really step into that role as an anchor institution, and that includes itself as an employer or influencing the local economy and making it much more accessible to young people. It means being a systems networker and convener, and particularly in communities of disadvantage where families and children are not getting the best start or a fair go, that local government can play a much stronger role in bringing people together to grapple with those challenges. And then also increasing the role as a place shaper, placemaker. This is something that local government does now, but it could be doing much more of to help communities flourish and be great places, spaces and communities where people can flourish. So in order to do that though, wellbeing councils will need to embrace new ideas, innovation, and use their existing levers, resources, relationships, purchasing power for greater value. So that's what councils can do themselves, but we also realise that local, central government has many of the levers and resources that support wellbeing. So changing the relationship to be a much stronger partnership between local and central government is key. And some people have said that if we do nothing else but make a difference there, this whole review will have been worth it. So we think that there needs to be much more intention and perhaps even some new institutional arrangements to support local and central government. And local government really supported by central government to use its anchor institution role to use its proximity to community and its local knowledge to help identify local priorities and outcomes that it can work with collaboratively with central government, but also alongside the community and hapu and iwi. We appreciate that most of the challenges we're going to be dealing with over the next 30 years are going to be ones that require a teaming up of everyone leveraging their strengths to ensure that there's change. So alongside this relationship with local and central government, how local government is funded is a key issue. Many people have commented to us that we've reached peak rates, and that means the community tolerance for rate rises is really challenging. And we're also aware that the revenue sharing between local and central government it means that only about 12% of revenue is generated locally and determined by local government, and the vast majority, 88%, from central government. So there need to be some mechanisms for better revenue sharing. We're also very mindful, and I've heard from local government about new roles and responsibilities being allocated by central government without resourcing. So unfunded mandates, we've recommended stop. And if there are regulatory impacts, and then there needs to be funding decisions, and where things that local government do have a national good benefit, then local government needs to be recognised in that. So a whole new approach to funding community outcomes and priorities. We can see that in the future there might be much more city deals or arrangements locally that will also include community organisations, hapu and iwi, so that what is resourced locally is much more determined locally in a partnership, rather than what happens now, a much more top-down rollout from Wellington approach. In funding and financing, we're also recommending that rates is retained, and that's because councils being able to generate their own revenue through rates provides for some autonomy. But we do think that there needs to be some streamlining of things like long-term plans, the rating processes, and various compliance requirements to unburden local government from some of these things, so it can have the bandwidth to lead some of this change needed for the future. We also are very aware of the short-term nature of local government and how difficult it is to make those long-term intergenerational decisions, especially around how we adapt to climate change. So we're looking at what are some ways to fund local government that take intergenerational challenges into account. So finally, how local government is organised. A lot of people assumed that this review was about amalgamation or changing the structure of local government. And we've been quite adamant to stay away from that, at least in the draft report, apart from identifying some core principles and a little bit of direction of travel. And that's because if that's what we'd focus, if we'd put much focus on that, then that's where everyone's attention would have gone. We appreciate that there are potentially some benefits from economies of scope and scale, but we're also of the view that bigger isn't always better, and we need to ensure that councils in small, geographically remote areas don't lose their local leadership. So the one size doesn't fit all is a message we've heard loud and clear, and keeping the local in local government as well. So in our report, we have suggested some potential ways that local government could be better organised, because there needs to be more collaboration and more teaming up regionally on some of the big, particularly infrastructure challenges. So in our report, there's more detail about that. But what we have done is identify some design principles that we think need to be considered in any structure changes. And they include, or are, keeping the local in local government, as I've just said. Secondly, that subsidiarity is a core principle. That means having decision-making at the lowest level possible to ensure community voice and influence. Thirdly, that local government is resourced so that it can be viable and have the capacity to respond to the challenges ahead of it. Fourth principle is that partnership is key, and local government needs to be able to have flexible arrangements for partnership models, for sharing governance with hapu and iwi, having council-controlled organisations, and different arrangements that enable the strengths of partners to come together to support the delivery of community outcomes. And the fifth and last principle is about economies of scope and making sure that the skills and resources are there and combined where it makes sense. So we see it's crazy to have 68 different IT systems across the country, or a really scarce specialist resource concentrated in a few areas and other areas having big gaps. So sometimes those skills and resources need to be organised in a way that will enable a strengthening of a whole region, not just a part of a region. So more of this can be found in the draft report from pages 214, it's not that big, 214. And we're aware of the strengths and weaknesses of different approaches, so we'd love to hear some feedback about what do you think would best enable young people's participation, or the issues for future generations better accounted for in the way that local government is organised, its role and function, and how it's funded, and how it works with others, central government. And I see there are a few central government people on the line here, so we'd be really interested in your questions or comments when we get to the Q&A. So I'm going to hand over to Antoine to finish off with system stewardship.
Hey, thanks, Gail. So we've been thinking about how local government can be the best it can be, and that needs consideration of the stewardship function. You know, who's looking after the long-term health and well-being of local government across Aotearoa New Zealand. That function is currently spread out amongst a number of individuals and agencies that include the Minister of Local Government, Department of Internal Affairs, the Secretary for Local Government Commission, Local Government New Zealand, Tai Tuara. On the planning side, Ministry for the Environment, and the professional side, New Zealand Planning Institute, and a number of other organisations. So it's a large number of agencies that aren't by them in of themselves connected to each other and to the whole system of local government. So we've been putting some thought into about what might our future stewardship function look like, how might it be organised. And certainly we're thinking that oversight and monitoring of the system's health, including its legislative provisions, is something that's going to be really important. Care for the system's long-term capability and its people, so not only attracting good people but retaining them, and we've talked a little bit about that earlier in terms of governance, but that also goes into the operations of councils, that people should feel, you know, when they become part of a local government family, they're part of a big family, and there'll be lots of opportunities for their career and networking and being able to find the right fit for them, not only just in the place where they live and work, but across the whole system. The maintenance enhancements of institutional knowledge and information. You know, we've had local government for some time now in Aotearoa New Zealand. It's getting to that maturity where it's really important to retain a lot of that knowledge for ongoing generations, and we've got the ability to be able to do that, but be able to do that in a systematic way across the whole system is going to be really important. In supporting partnerships, co-design and innovation, local government can't do many of these, resolve some of these challenges of the 21st century on its own. And so being able to foster and promote a system that reacts in a really positive way to those partnerships and co-design and collaborations is going to be really important in the future. So we're really keen to hear from people if they've got any ideas on that. And we're also talking obviously to the many parts of the stewardship role in local government at the same time. I'm just going to pause there, and I think we're going to move into our Q&A, which certainly for me is one of my favourite parts of our presentations. And Brendan's joined us, so we've got the whole panel with us. This is actually our last of our presentations. I think we've been going for about 3 months, Janine. Mm-hmm. So this is a lucky last. That's pretty exciting. So I'm going to pause there and pass it back to you, Janine.
Great. Now we do have a very good question that has been placed on the Q&A tool, and while we before we go to that, just want to remind you again, this is your opportunity to test any of your thinking or ask for clarity from the panel. So please, send those questions in. This question, I think, probably goes to about the panel's resolve about making the vote available to 16 years and over. We've seen a lot of polls show significant public opposition to the Make It 16 argument. How is the panel going to influence central government to make that change when it's at this time an unpopular decision, or how do we make it more palatable? So I'm going to maybe hand to Penny to start us off on that one.
Thank you, and I think other panel members may want to comment, but you know, speaking as an old politician, and old in many ways, this is an interesting one for the panel. This isn't a referendum. We've taken people's ideas, we've gathered up the thinking and the wisdom from everybody, and we'll make our own mind up. We believe that giving people the vote at 16 makes absolute sense. It ticks all the boxes, everything that we want to see delivered by way of equity, democracy, ensuring that people are far more engaged than they have been, and also giving people a say. Our people who are 16 are going to be there to pick up the pieces in an intergenerational way, and we believe really strongly in that. So, you know, in the same way that we often hear from the same loud voices, this has given us an opportunity to hear from everyone, and we've got the luxury of representing that voice in the recommendations that we make. I don't think it's as unpopular as it sounds. I think we've heard from a few angry old people, and I don't think that that necessarily represents the whole of Aotearoa. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
If I could just add, yeah, could I just add, Janine, and for the information of the questioner, thank you. You know, we will be making recommendations, and we strongly believe in that recommendation, so we'll be adding our voice to that message. We would expect then that will go into the electoral reform process mix that Justice is doing work on at the moment. So we've made a range of recommendations around the electoral system, including who should run the votes, the electoral 3-yearly, 4-yearly cycle, shifting to a 4-yearly cycle, and the age. So we would expect that will go in and be considered by Justice in that electoral reform process, because logically, you know, when you think about age or voting terms, that there's a natural sort of extension question as to why would you not then apply that at a national level as well.
Kia ora, Brendan. Gail?
There seems to be less opposition to changing the voting age for local government than there is for central government. So there's a real opportunity to test this by applying it to local government, and then when people see that the will doesn't cave in, that it actually turns out to be a good way of strengthening local democracy, then it may be extended to include the general election as well. And it's much easier to get it over the line for local government as it is for central government. So we will be pointing that out, that this is an opportunity to start the process and test it in a local government arena.
And I'd just chip in further and say it's been applied, you know, New Zealand, this isn't the first across the world, it's happened elsewhere, and their systems of democracy haven't fallen apart as a result of it. I just point out that it's an opportunity also where it's part of a suite of our thoughts about how do we get greater youth involvement and participation, and certainly encouraging people to vote and potentially stand at a younger age is something we're very keen to support. But it's also how do we ensure that we have people contributing to the conversations in a meaningful way on an ongoing basis, not just once every 3 or 4 years, although that's we'd see that as a great constitutional step. Beyond just the voting at 16, I think many of the people on this call are associated with councils and supporting youth and youth participation. There are many great opportunities, and with youth being involved in so many of the services or impacted locally by so many decisions, the opportunity to strengthen and empower that voice is something we're very supportive of.
Kia ora, Jim. We have another question here, which is about moving away from postal vote to one similar to how we have voting booths in central government elections, and that being about people being able to turn up to a booth and receive the voting papers compared to getting it in the mail. So who would like to comment on that?
I'll tackle that one first up, Janine. I mean, we had representations to us around electronic voting and the merits or otherwise of it. And there are definitely security concerns. But as a panel, we cannot possibly envisage over the next 30 years some of those issues not being addressed. And the idea of continuing on with the current paper-based voting system, which in itself is inherently insecure, as witnessed by those of us who saw voting papers blowing down our streets. So, a couple of things: having a nationally run elections process as opposed to it being run council by council. And even if there was to be a voting booth process, there's an interesting question as to should that happen simultaneously with central government elections and do it at the same time. And my own view is, if you're thinking about electronic voting, a really sensible place to start is electronic voting at the booth. So there's a whole lot of possibilities there. And it's one of the areas that no doubt we'll get some feedback in terms of submissions. We'd love to hear more about what you all think.
Kia ora, Brendan.
Sorry, Janine, I just want to add to that, just from a personal experience. I'm in a former role. I was chair of a couple of our iwi post-settlement governance entities, and we did a lot of online voting, and we did postal voting as well. We had 80% of our postal voting papers returned to us, and online we had a 97% turnout. And people voted the way that they wanted to. Some were supportive and some weren't, and some abstained. But it was very successful in terms of participation. And so that experience has really shown me that where you provide people a accessible way of voting, having their preference, they're more likely to use that than not use it. And postal, like Brendan said, the postal voting, I think we've heard from a number of people around the country that don't have postal boxes anymore, or they don't see the postie, for a week or two. So there's lots of cases where people receive the postal votes a week after the elections, that's exactly the same as not receiving them at all.
Kia ora. Next question. What have you heard about issues around council-controlled organisations, particularly transparency and accountability? Jim?
Thanks, Janine. It'd be fair to say that there hasn't been a great deal of commentary back to the panel about council-controlled organisations. I think we see that there are opportunities, particularly if we're looking for councils to be more joined up, working together, working collaboratively. Then shared CCOs certainly could have a significant role. I think that the tenor of the question around accountability, clear accountability with CCOs, I think it's fair to say that there is a highly variable degree of accountability for CCOs. I've seen many CCOs who their only objective for the year is to return a rate of return of X%, and that's the only direction that they've received from their shareholding council, which is not particularly flash in my view in terms of outlining expectations clearly and how that aligns with the purposes and objectives of their parent council. So I think some have made not much progress. Others have a more sophisticated set of arrangements in place. And I think if we're going to have if CCOs feature more prominently, particularly if they're shared among councils, then there does need to be a very clear expectation set about what is the purpose objectives that are sought, and the behaviours and the approaches and the way in which they work with others in delivering on community outcomes. So I think there's not much said about it, to be fair, in our draft report either, other than we see that there is potential in them, particularly where collaboration is paramount.
Thank you, Jim. Gail, I'm thinking this might be right up your alley. So does the report recommend local government should provide more of the services that community organisations do to represent and serve particular marginalised groups' interests for equity, or does it propose to invest more in community organisations to carry on doing this work with greater local funding for advocacy and services?
Yeah, I don't think we're at all suggesting that local government should enter into the territory that community organisations are occupying. It's more of a partnership, and local government using its unique strengths and assets as a convener, a facilitator, an advocate, probably more than anything, definitely not necessarily delivering things that others can do. In fact, local government could facilitate more community and hapu and iwi delivery of things locally if that made sense. The issue of funding community organisations, I guess that's something that we see has much more potential if local and central government are better joined up, because central government is the funder of the majority of community organisations through its various grant schemes and contracts. There could be some review of what local government funds in the community. Sometimes it just spreads the limited funding very thin, and perhaps looking at where local government is strongest in the whole prevention upstream, strengthening communities so they're better able to cope with many of the challenges that end up being the reactive responses to inequity happens through programs and services could be alleviated. So see much more local government in the wellbeing space having a more preventative and upstream potential role.
Good, Gail. Now we have run out of questions, but I'm going to put one to the panel because there's been a lot of discussion about voting and that being the way that youth can participate in local government. Would you like to talk a little more about participatory and deliberative democracy, in particular around really pressing issues that are probably of key importance to youth, like climate change? Penny, are you happy to kick that one off?
Thanks, Janine. It's so interesting that people, around the world are turning off in droves to participating in formal processes of government and local government. And as we know, the rise of conspiracy theories and alternative facts is taking over, and we see that every day. What we're really interested in and have spent a lot of time looking at is deliberative and participatory democracy mechanisms. This has happened around the world, and Gail and Antoine talked about it briefly in the presentation. This is a process that basically hands the responsibility to a large degree to people to act as citizens rather than just sit there and take whatever the government or your council tells you to do. So this is forming citizens' assemblies to make large and complex decisions that can then be enacted by government or local government. And I'm thinking particularly being based here in Auckland, the really complex decisions that we're going to need to face here about climate change and its impact on how we live in Tamaki Makaurau. Do we stop building near the coast? Do we stop houses being built in areas where they've already got permission to build? How do we relocate people? How do we make this intergenerationally sound? And how do we not load the next generation with the huge cost of this? And it's going to take big, complicated community discussions to bring about good, sensible solutions to this. And it's not all about who you vote for on, a 3-yearly cycle. So we're really interested in seeing more of that. And we're hoping in the submissions that people give us feedback on that and tell us what they think. But this is something the panel is really passionate about. So I'm sure others would like to comment or expand. Good to go.
We're really inspired by Watercare in Auckland, who've run a citizens' assembly on their future water strategy, and they had a real cross-section of Aucklanders involved, including young people, so much more representative of the community than the elected members. And they had to tackle some really challenging issues around future water supply, and came as as an assembly, came to a place that Watercare never imagined there would be consensus of, and that was about water reuse or water recycling. That is going to have to be one of the future water strategies. And that happened as a result of people getting together, having experts come and give them information, explain what the challenges of the future would be and what the various solutions are, what's been tried in other countries, and allowing that group time to deliberate and put their perspectives out there and have the kind of depth of conversation, not the adversarial bouncing backwards and forwards of fixed positions, to come to a decision which is going to be fit for the future and affordable for the city and good for the environment. So that's an example. We're also encouraged by the Gisborne District Council, who are at the moment organising a citizens' assembly on climate change and seeing what's been hitting Tairāwhiti, Gisborne area for the last, I don't know, it seems like years of floods and slash and the impacts of forestry and the vulnerability of the roads. Climate change is really having impact now, and they're really embracing these new democracy tools to try and have those really challenging conversations at a community level and take them forward, really grappling with things that I don't think our short-term orientated representative democracy is well equipped to cope with.
Excellent. Kia ora, Gail. I'm just going to invite any of the panel members to add any further comments before we wind up. We don't have any more questions, so I'll just open it up to the panel.
Yeah, just wanted to add, we had, and I think Janine, you mentioned this earlier, we had a survey of just over 5,000 people, and the majority supported reducing the age of voting to 16 and 17-year-olds. And I should qualify that there was a significant number of young people that participated in the survey, and it asked a whole range of questions, including that one. So that was really helpful to us. So we've had lots of participation in online surveys through social media and the like, but we often don't get very many submissions from youth organisations and from rangatahi. And so for those who are on the call who might either represent or advocate on behalf of rangatahi or be rangatahi themselves, we'd really encourage you making submissions, and they don't have to be long ones. They can be to a particular point or particular topic that you want to raise with us. And so your views are really important. We have to live what we're preaching. So we want to hear your views. And if you can make a submission, that'd be very greatly received. Thank you.
Excellent. Any other comments?
Oh, just to add to what Antoine's saying about the Get Vocal in Your Local online platform and survey of predominantly young people, I was really encouraged too that when young people were asked what are the things that you think are key priorities for local government in your community, they were sustainability, how we live in a way that is good for the planet and our places. And secondly, it was about the economy and participation in the economy, not just jobs, but being part of the local economy. And then thirdly, it was about safety in your community and wellbeing. And that is setting the scene for a wellbeing council and why people and communities need to be as important as physical infrastructure in the future of local government. So really encourage yourselves online here and your networks to continue to share those views, because it's really helpful for us in having our final report very clear on those issues.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'm going to say that we have come to an end of this webinar. Again, just as Antoine said, really encourage you to make a submission and to spread the word and do your part to make sure that the youth voice is heard by the panel and not drowned out by others. So with that, I'm going to ask Antoine to close us with a karakia.
Kia ora. Unuhia ki te urutapu nui kia wātia, kia māma te ngā kau te tinana, e te wairua i te ara takata. Hoi ara e runga whakaere aki ki runga kia tīna, haumi e hui e tae ki e. Ka pūteruha ka hautaranga tahi, haumi e hui e tae ki e. When the old net is old and worn and tired, throw it to the side and cast out the new net.
Thank you for joining us. Bye.